the right pair of glasses. Okay. This evening, I will be speaking on the subject of imminence. This is one of those subjects in the Bible where if you actually get a little bit of balance, it helps you out where you don't go to one extreme or another. You notice right here in the cover, I have a picture of Mount St. Helens, which was smoking slightly before its eruption in 1980. I think Mount St. Helens is an interesting picture of imminence. My ministry is Soothkeep. That's Old English for Truth Fortress. If you're interested, you can find me on YouTube. You can find me on Rumble, Instagram, Twitter, Telegram. And I have a website, soothkeep.info. My books are available. All the ones out of my table, plus a lot more, they're available on Amazon. And if you like to watch prophecy videos and you're spending time on YouTube, consider subscribing to my channel. All right, Imminence on the Accelerator. This is Mount St. Helens. And they knew that the eruption of Mount St. Helens was imminent, but they did not know the day nor the hour that it would erupt. So this raises a question. There's an imminence debate. Is imminence something that was any moment from the days of the apostles? That means any second from that time till now could have just happened anywhere along the line? Or is imminence an any generation phenomenon? In other words, did every generation from the early church until today live under the expectancy that things could accelerate in their day to the second coming of the Lord? It's real easy to demonstrate from the scriptures that the apostles lived under the expectancy that things could accelerate to the coming of the Lord in their lifetime. It's easy to prove in early church history that the early church fathers lived under the same expectation. It's a little harder, in my estimation, to prove that they actually labored under the idea that the rapture could literally have happened any second. Now, this any moment view of, like the any second view of imminence has two components. The first is that the rapture could have happened any minute or any moment since the apostles. And the second is that there's zero correlation between the rapture of the church and any of the signs that we've been watching for several centuries, and they're very much accelerated in the last couple of decades. So I want you to bear in mind, if you're going to be consistent with any moment, the other aspect of this, the flip side of the coin, is there's zero correlation between what we see and the rapture of the church. I'm not convinced that's true. Probably most of you are not convinced that's true. But I'm going to work through the difficulties here in the next 40 minutes because many of us struggle under the conception of we've just been drinking this idea that there's no signs before the rapture, and this is true, but we want to balance it because it's true in one sense and it's false in another. Now, on the any generation view of imminence, the apostles and the early church fathers watched expectantly. They believed things could accelerate in their lifetime under the coming of the Lord. They were looking for the rapture of the church. They were looking for the second coming, and they expected that they could see the Antichrist arise in the near future. Now, this expectancy was just not random thinking. It wasn't wishful thinking. It was based on prophetic convergence. Now, I want you to think about what the early church was going through when they lived in this expectancy. They had just seen many Bible prophecies fulfilled literally, exactly, and entirely. They had seen over 100 prophecies that were specifically focused on the Messiah fulfilled, not just to the letter, but even to the dotting of the yot in the tittle. They saw the 69 weeks. They were counting those 69 weeks as best as they could from the approximate era, because they didn't know the exact year. But from the approximate era, they were counting forwards, and they were living in the expectancy that they would see the Messiah in their lifetime. And they had their eyes were connected. Their eyes were fastened on the connection between fulfilled and unfulfilled prophecies. If you recall, many places in the Old Testament, you have a bunch of prophecies on the first coming of the Lord, and they're intertangled and intermingled with prophecies on the second coming of the Lord. And they were expecting that these would be much closer together than they were. But as the centuries rolled by, they begin to have their eye on the apparent and real birth pang convulsions. They believed things were going to accelerate. Now, let me give you a few clarifications on what we mean when we say no signs. Because the concept of no signs is confusing to many. Some folks mean zero correlation when they say no signs. Most dispensationalists or prophecy lovers in our day don't mean zero correlation. They mean no direct correlation between the rapture and the signs that we see. So it's the same terminology when we say no signs, but there's very different senses. Zero correlation. If you say there's zero correlation, there's absolutely no relationship between the rapture of the church and the signs that we see, then Israel being rebirthed is insignificant. Then the coming together of Russia, Turkey, and Iran is insignificant. No development we see in the Middle East is significant. No development that we see in the central bank digital currency, on the coming big brother government, on surveillance technology. None of this is significant. It's all irrelevant. Has nothing to do with the rapture. But if we go to no direct correlation, now what we're saying is we definitely see a correlation between the signs and the coming tribulation. And this coming tribulation alludes to or implies the soon coming rapture of the church. So now we have an indirect correlation. We have an indirect relationship. And this harmonizes. So indirect no signs. Indirect correlation with no signs harmonizes with prophetic convergence. And this is a classic example that when it comes to our terminology that we use in doctrine, especially in Bible prophecy, the content of that terminology is more important than the terminology itself. Because you can have good terminology and poor content. And you can have great content and poor terminology. So let's look at clarifications on indirect correlation. Indirect correlation focuses on prophetic convergence. Now, what do I mean by prophetic convergence? Prophetic convergence is everything we see going on right now that's happening in an increased variety, increased frequency, increased intensity, and it's headed towards the stage setting for the tribulation. A day is going to come when this stage is set as far as God says it's going to be set. And when that day comes, the rapture is going to happen. Now, these signs include things like central bank digital currency, mark of the beast technology, surveillance technology, geopolitical shuffling, so that we see the nations in Europe being rearranged. We see the Gog and Magog coalition coming together. We see Israel's enemies getting more and more incensed and infuriated against Israel. We see quantum computing and AI and robotics and transhumanism. We see a lot of stuff. This is all stage setting. And some of this stuff is getting so far advanced that unless something happens, if we go down this transhumanism path for 30, 40 years, will there be any human beings who are human enough to go up in the rapture? Right? If we go far enough down this AI, quantum computing, robotics path, a few decades down the road, we're going to get to a place where Armageddon will be hydraulic fluid, bridle deep, and not blood bridle deep. So this stuff is really racing towards us. This implies that the tribulation is near, which implies that the rapture is near. So these signs point to the rapture. Now, the stage setting for the tribulation has the same relationship to the rapture that Christmas decorations have to Thanksgiving. We know that Thanksgiving is really close because people are starting to put their Christmas decorations up. At least we do in America. Maybe you don't do that up here. I forget, maybe there might be a little more common sense north of the border. Now, there is confusion on what imminence means. Some insist that imminence means absolutely no signs, there's absolutely no convergence. They're really dogmatic on this. Got a few books in my library on this. They think I'm a knothead for believing there is correlation there. But others embrace prophetic convergence, but they're trying also to embrace there's no signs, and it's confusing for them. How do they reconcile these things? So it's really funny. You can listen to a preacher get up and harangue for 5 minutes. There's absolutely no signs that point to the rapture. The signs have nothing to do with the rapture. And 5 minutes later, he's talking about all the signs going on, tell us the rapture's near. It's like, that didn't really connect. But there's no reason to be confused. The concept that imminence means absolutely no signs is unique to dispensationalism. You will not find that use anywhere else in the English language, not for the last 200 years. It's contrary to English usage. And we're going to look at this. It's a unique use of imminence. So in English, we use imminence in two ways. We use the imminence of things whose date is known. We talk about imminent Christmas, imminent vacations, imminent holidays, imminent birthdays, and imminent legislative recesses. We know exactly what day that's going to happen on. That doesn't mean it's not imminent. It just, because imminent doesn't mean there's no signs or no evidence. It just means it's near. That's what it means. And so you notice none of these things are any moment, and they're not signless. They involve certainties, not probabilities. But now there's another usage that's even more common. We use imminence of things whose time we don't know and can't know precisely. For instance, we use it of imminent war, imminent volcanic eruption, an imminent avalanche, an imminent hurricane landfall, or an imminent dam failure. None of these things, again, are signless. Every one of them, the scientists get together, whether they're political scientists and they say everything's pointing to war. We don't know if it's 2 weeks away, 2 months away, maybe a year out, but war is coming. If we're looking at a volcanic eruption, we've got scientists putting their heads together and saying, listen, here's this evidence, here's evidence C, evidence D, evidence E, and all this points together that this mountain is going to erupt in the near future. How near, we don't know, but this is evidence that points to imminence. So none of these things are signless. No, there's no such thing as a signless volcanic eruption. It might be signless in the sense we didn't have scientific instruments there measuring it, but if we had had scientific evidences there measuring it, it would have been filled with signs. That's how we would know it's going to erupt. When a hurricane reaches its landfall, we know it's coming. It's not signless. We don't know when it's going to make landfall. We can guess within a few hours or a day, but we can see it coming. Now, as these signs of these kind of things increase in their variety, frequency, and intensity, the imminence window shrinks. When a hurricane is first forming out there in the Caribbean Sea or out in the Atlantic, and we're looking at it form and we're guesstimating its possible trajectories, and is it going to reach Florida? Is it going to go south of Florida? Is it going to go north and go into North Carolina? Where's it going to go? We're guessing. And we might say it's going to make landfall in 4 to 7 days, maybe 8 days. As this thing starts moving and its path becomes more confirmed and it speeds up or slows down, we adjust our estimates. Eventually it'll get to the point where we say it's going to make landfall within 24 hours. Could be within 16 hours, could be 20 hours, but it will be inside of 24 hours. So that imminence window narrows down. Now, it does reach a point where it's any moment. Same with the volcano, same with the dam failing. It gets to the point where it is any moment. Now, my favorite illustration of imminence is a volcano. The early signs of eruption include things like quake swarms, gas vents, ash vents. These things can continue for weeks, months, or even years before you get a full-blown eruption. The Yellowstone caldera has been simmering with greater or lesser activity for centuries. One of these days, maybe in the tribulation, maybe at the end of the tribulation, that baby is going to erupt. Folks, we do not want to be here on planet Earth when that thing erupts. But these things could erupt. Yellowstone could erupt. It could accelerate to imminent eruption anytime. You have to watch it. Now, as pressure on a mountain builds, a bulge may appear on the side. Another thing that's going to happen, you could have little gas vents opening up. You could have increased quake activity where it goes from 1 or 2 tremors a week to 1 or 2 tremors an hour to hundreds or thousands of tremors in a 24-hour period. And those tremors could increase from being all under 1 on the Richter scale to being 2 to 3 on the Richter scale. They might even increase to 3 and 4 on the Richter scale before the big earthquake comes. That's going to be associated with this volcanic eruption. Or maybe the eruption will release the pressure and those quakes will go away. But anyway, you're looking at definite, scientific, measurable signs that are scientific evidence of imminence. Now, as the pressure builds, these bulges could get massive. You saw the picture of the bulge on Mount St. Helens, which is a few weeks before it erupted, and that thing ultimately got much bigger. And it had a lot of people worried. And when that side blew out, that was a nightmare for anyone within 10 miles of that, facing that bulge. Now, pressure's building on an earthquake or a volcano until either the earthquake fault gives or the volcano erupts. This is the same thing that's happening right now in the world. There is tribulation pressure building in this world. And it's getting amped up, and it's getting amped up, and it is going to erupt someday soon. And the Lord is going to pull us out of this world before that eruption. Now, I want to point out, and this is contrary to absolutely no signs, but it's not contrary to relative signs or to indirect correlation. Hebrews 10:25 says, exhort each other daily, and the more so as we see that day approaching. Now, how do we see that day approaching? If there's absolutely no relationship between signs and the rapture, you can't see that day coming. There's nothing to see it coming by. But if there's an indirect correlation between the stage setting in the world for the tribulation and for the rapture of the church, now you have things that you can watch with your eyeballs, contemplate with your God-given reason, and you're using God-given revelation, and now you can see that day approaching. Now, I want you to notice, this is directed to the church. You can go to a passage like Matthew 24, and people can say, well, that's talking about Israel and the tribulation. Okay, we can throw that one to you. But this one's not. Hebrews 10, this is written to the church. And it says you can see a literal day approaching because you see the signs of the day approaching. Folks, as I mentioned in my last message, the day of the Lord works just like a regular day. You can see signs of the approaching day. Now, if you don't have scientific methodology, you're not going to be able to calculate the moment the sun rises, especially if you're living in hilly country or mountainous country, and you're not going to see the sun rise till it comes up over the top of the mountains, and it's really the distant horizon, right? But you can't mistake that the sun is coming. And this is how this works for us. We're not going to know the day nor the hour. It's impossible to know the day nor the hour, but it's also impossible to miss this approaching day. Now, here's another one, Matthew 16:3. You hypocrites, you can read the face of the heavens, but you can't read the signs of the times. Now, was this just a cute little Sunday school lesson that we need to recall and teach in Sunday school? Or does this have practical application to the second coming too? Folks, if this applied to the first coming, it applies to the second coming. It's the same principle. You know, we hear in the world, red sky in morning, sailors take warning. Red sky at night, sailors delight. The core insight here is the signs of the times are just as readable as the signs of the weather. I have my own paraphrase of this. When storm clouds start forming, the watchmen sound warning. When storm clouds draw nigh, the watchman will fly. Now, the Bible requires us to watch signs. Matthew 24, 32 and 33. Now, learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branches become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near. So also you, when you see all these things, know that it is near at the doors. Now, technically speaking, this passage is talking about the tribulation period. It is talking to the Jews in the tribulation who are looking at the signs specifically mentioned in Matthew 24. But the principle applies to us too, because they're looking for the signs in the tribulation. We are looking for the signs pointing to the tribulation. They're correlated. What we're looking at is a subset of that. They'll never have that if we don't have stage setting first. Now, we need to look for signs. Now, we don't want to become people who every new sign that happens, we get all caught up in, oh, the rapture is going to happen next week because of blah, blah, blah. No, we don't want to go there. But we do want to be cognizant of the signs. You know, it's interesting. I regularly have to deal with people who have their own little YouTube channels, and some of them are actually very big YouTube channels, and they go down these high watch theories, and every time there's an eclipse or every time there's a Jewish feast, and they're getting all excited because the rapture is going to happen in a few weeks. And a lot of people get all excited over that, and I'm kind of groaning on the inside. The Bible says no man can know the day nor the hour. We're not going to guess it lucky. We're not going to get an educated guess and get it right. Now, stage setting must precede the tribulation. There will be decades of stage setting before the tribulation. The stage setting is not going to happen 100% within 3 weeks or 3 months after the rapture of the church. It takes decades to set this stuff up. We've been watching it for decades. This implies the church is going to see most of the stage setting for the tribulation. And now we might have a window between the rapture and the tribulation. We don't know if it's going to be a few days, a few weeks, a few months. It might be a few years. I'm skeptical of that. I'm thinking it's likely to be a few months or less, but we'll find out when it happens. And then it'll be like a football bet, a football pool or a soccer pool, you know, in the local office, and we get to see who wins. It'll be interesting to find out who's right on that one, right? You get up there. Emmaus Road 101, our eschatology 101. Now, the rapture and the tribulation are connected. There's no randomness here. The day of the second coming is set in stone. Acts 17:31 says, he has appointed a day. And how detailed is this appointment? Well, if we go to Revelation 9:13 through 15, we read about the sixth angel. We read, loose the four angels who are prepared for an hour, a day, a month, and a year. Folks, if one of the judgments in the tribulation has this kind of precision, they all have this precision. If the sixth angel has this precision, then every one of the seals, every one of the trumpets, every one of the bowls has this precision, the rapture has this precision, and the second coming has this precision. They're all set, not just for the year, not just for the month, not just for the day. They're set for the hour. I also want to point out that tribulation is in a fixed relationship with the second coming. We see in Matthew 24, 29 through 31, the tribulation ends with the second coming. And we also see the rapture is in a fixed relationship with the tribulation and the second coming. The rapture is the morning star of the day of the Lord. The tribulation is the dawning of the day of the Lord. The second coming is the sunrise of the day of the Lord. And the millennium is the presence of the day of the Lord. Now, the rapture can't happen decades or centuries prior to the tribulation. It's in a fixed relationship with it. Now, we don't know what that fixed relationship is, but it's definitely in a fixed relationship with it. And it bears analogy to the picture of a morning star, the dawning, and the sunrise. It will bear a very similar analogy. So here's the same chart that I had this morning. So we've got the morning star, the dawning of the day, the sunrise, and the day proper. Now, we are going to see the stage setting. I've mentioned this before, but I want to emphasize this. You can't avoid this conclusion unless you invoke one of two solutions. You either have to say there's a decades-long window between the rapture and the tribulation, which I'm very, very skeptical of, or you have a stage-setting pace that's many times faster than historical precedent. Now, I believe that we have the ability with modern technology to see things go at a faster pace than we're used to seeing, but still, just for instance, you can't have a man come to power and in 3 months turn a nobody nation, a backwater nation, into a superpower. You just don't build infrastructure that fast. You don't build factories that fast. You don't build military strength that fast. You don't build national wealth that fast. So we need to be walking in common sense here and be walking in the context of historical precedent and the fact that the window between the rapture and the tribulation is probably going to be short and not very long. But men struggle here because of the dictum, there's no signs. Now, as we mentioned before, no signs is correct if it's taken in the sense of indirect correlation. And that's not opposed to prophetic convergence. Now, let's look at the stage setting that is going to be in place when the tribulation starts. In the tribulation passages, Israel is in the land and established in it as a nation. So this has to be in place before the tribulation starts. We already know this started way, way back, and it came to a head in 1948 when Israel was established as a nation. We also have to have Israel ready and prepped to build the temple. You know, Israel has been at it for over 2 decades, gathering materials for the temple, training priests for the temple, building the accoutrements for the temple, gathering building blocks for the temple. They've been doing this for a long time. You couldn't just start from scratch at the rapture and then get everything ready in 2 months. But we've got a couple decades, maybe 3 decades of preparation here. 3, Israel's a cup of trembling to the nations. 4, Israel is receptive to an earthly Messiah. It's scary to see this at work in Israel today. It's scary to see them willing to receive anybody that will give them peace with their enemies. And they don't care if that peace comes through smoking them in war or making peace. They don't really care. Just give us peace. Excuse me. A little bit froggy in the throat here. 5, the world is going to manifest the foundation of apostasy that the tribulation builds on. Honey, can you bring me that bottle of water that's on the back table back there? 6, the world is going to manifest the technocracy, the technology, the ideology, and the chaos that the Antichrist and the 10 kings are going to exploit. And the last one is that the Russian juggernaut must rise, invade Israel, and get crushed. Sometimes I think my throat is my thorn in the flesh. So why do we watch expectantly throughout the entire church age? Why watch for the coming of the Lord from the apostles through the early church fathers all the way up to the present time? Why not just hold off until we see Israel born in 1948 and then get excited? Well, the fact is, we can only watch with the light, excuse me, that we have. Watching and comprehending. Oh, here we go. Thank you. There we go. Fisherman's friends. Here we go. So watching and comprehending conversion is a combination of 2 variables, revelation and illumination. Now, revelation is what the Bible gives us. But if you recall, from the early church starting in the late 2nd century, we saw an invasion of replacement theology. By the time Augustine was around and Jerome was around, replacement theology was firmly entrenched. Augustine popularized it for the next 1,500 years with his book on the city of God. But the Bible is locked. The revelation is locked. If you believe replacement theology, you cannot understand what the Bible's teaching. If you think Israel is to be spiritualized in the church, there's no way you can understand Bible prophecy. If you think it's all centered on the church, especially the Catholic Church, there's no way to understand Bible prophecy. So we got all this glorious revelation, and it's locked. The second part is the illumination. You need the help of the indwelling Holy Spirit if you're going to get the right understanding of the Bible. This means you have to be born again. This means you have to have the right gospel, the real gospel. Now, until the Reformation and the rise of dispensationalism, most of the Bible was a closed book. If you were educated, you might read it in Latin, but you wouldn't understand it because Latin's not your first language. Until the Reformation, nobody took the doctrines of salvation literally. It was all just high church hocus pocus. By the way, you know where the word hocus pocus comes from? In the Catholic Church, when they do the Mass, in Latin is hoc est meum corpus. This is my body. And when the priest would mumble it real fast, it sounded to the people in the lay people like they were saying hocus pocus. And so hocus pocus came to be used of anything magic or anything corny or anything pretend. So now we use it for pretend magic, hocus pocus. So now you learned something tonight. So throughout this whole time, you come up to dispensationalism was the first time people took the Bible literally. The Reformation started the ball rolling when they said sola scriptura, the Bible's the only rule of faith and practice. That laid a foundation. We wouldn't be where we are today if we didn't have that foundation laid. Now, we don't agree with the Reformation on everything that came out of it doctrinally, but we agree with the principles. We agree with the sovereignty of God. We agree with the Bible is the only rule of faith and practice. Jesus is the only way of salvation. Grace is the only way. Faith is the only way. These are all true. Then when the rise of dispensationalism, they just took the principles of Reformation, the Bible is the only rule of faith and practice, and they said, you know what? We applied this to salvation. Why don't we apply this to Bible prophecy? And that's when the light started to explode. So men had been watching low-level convergence from the early church all the way up to the time of dispensationalism in the 1830s, but they've been watching it without a scientific method to understand it and without really having the right hermeneutic to understand the Bible because they were allegorical. Now, once you recover revelation by removing away from replacement theology and saying we're just going to take the whole Bible literally, and then once you actually have a gospel that gets people born again and indwelt by the Holy Spirit, now we have the Holy Spirit to lead us into the God-given revelation to understand it. I believe this was prophesied in Daniel 10:4 or Daniel 12:4. But you, Daniel, seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall travel to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. This isn't speaking merely about modern technology. This is talking about the fact that in the people of God, their knowledge of the Bible is going to increase exponentially, particularly knowledge of Bible prophecy. Do you know right now, your average born-again Christian in a Bible-believing church, where prophecy is taught literally, that they're 1 year old in the Lord and they've been reading the Bible diligent and they've been listening to good prophetic teaching, they know more than any of the great names at the start of the Reformation on Bible prophecy. This is pretty amazing. This is what William Tyndale was saying, wasn't it? Before I'm done, he speaks to the priest. Before I'm done, the plowboy will know the Bible better than you. This is what happens when we go sola scriptura. Pastors are amazing gifts of God. Bible teachers are amazing gifts of God. But they are not given to teach you so much what the Bible says, is to teach you how to understand the Bible. Just give you the principles. You know, the Bible can defend itself. It's like a lion. Just open the cage and let it out. Anyway, we have knowledge. Now here's a picture. in the early church in the Middle Ages, the light of the Bible that was available to us, even though it was potentially was huge, it was like a little candle, was hidden between a bad gospel and replacement theology. In the Reformation, now it's like a little camping lantern. With the rise of dispensationalism, it's like a glorious sun. Now, imminence on the accelerator. From the early church all the way to the present day, the Lord has always set things up so that man always has promising convergence before his eyeballs. He's looking out there, he's seeing things happening. He's saying, you know what? Things could accelerate in our lifetime to the coming of the Lord. He wanted men always to be focused on the potential of the coming of the Lord. He wanted men to live under the shadow of the second coming. He wanted them to live for eternity and not for time. He wanted them to live for the coming kingdom and not for the kingdom of this present evil world. But with the rise of dispensationalism, we had the light and the technical tools, we had the theological tools, the scientific tools to actually come and approach the scriptures. And more than that, we had the Holy Spirit. Because the best tools on earth are not going to do the job without the indwelling Holy Spirit. And now we have the full power of the scriptures available to us. I think it's amazing that I know people who have been saved 4 or 5 years, reading the Bible seriously for 4 or 5 years, and the amount of knowledge that they have accumulated in 5 years on Bible prophecy and basic theology is absolutely mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling. May God set a fire in your heart that you throw yourself into his things. You know, you are the only light that some of the people you rub shoulders with have. You are it. And if you're not their only light, you are their best light. So anyway, we now have the tools to properly evaluate what we see. Well, that was brilliant. Okay, I hit the wrong button. These crazy guys get up here and do all this Pentecostal excitement. All right. We now have the tools that we can evaluate what we're seeing and compare it to the scriptures and actually have half reasonable speculations on where we are. And as long as we consider that this is just our best effort, we're just connecting dots, we know it's coming soon, we just don't know how soon. If we can leave it at that, we're going to do very good. As soon as we start thinking, oh, we got this connected just perfectly, and the rapture is going to happen next year on June 4th, yep, we'll see. All right, the first coming. This was like a dormant volcano coming back to life. Men had counted down the 69 weeks, the 483 years. And after 400 silent years, this volcano sprang back to life. You think about the initial burst of activity. John the Baptist came on the scene. Christ came on the scene, doing miracles, things that were prophesied, raising people from the dead. And never a man spake like this. And then the apostles came along. And now instead of having one troublemaker, you've got a dozen of them. Plus the broader circle's over 300. And they're going out and they're doing the same stuff he was doing and saying the same things he was saying. And then Pentecost came and the Spirit fell upon the church and the world was never the same. So they had expected, on the basis of all the stuff they were seeing, they expected a Messiah in the immediate future or at least the near future. And it didn't happen. What they were confused on is they were familiar with the Old Testament suffering Messiah passages and the Old Testament reigning Messiah passages, but they didn't clearly see that these were two distinct events, separated by a vast parentheses. And the early church did not understand the parentheses until we get to Acts 15 in the Jerusalem Council. For instance, in Acts 15 verses 13 through 16, we read, after they become silent, James answered, saying, men and brethren, listen to me. Simon has declared how God at the first visited the Gentiles to take out of them a people for his name. And with this, the words of the prophets agree, just as it is written, after this, I will return and will rebuild the tabernacle of David, which has fallen down. I will rebuild its ruins and I will set it up. Now, some people think, oh, see, building the church is building the temple. No. No. God's calling out of the Gentiles the people for his name. That's the church age. And then after this, after the time of the Gentiles is done, after this, I will return and rebuild the tabernacle of David. This is what's going on. So they finally figured it out. Oh, yeah. The Bible talked about setting Israel aside. Hosea 5 and 6, he's going to go up to heaven and just going to do his own thing, and he's going to leave the Jews alone, and they're going to be alone for 2,000 years, and then in the 3,000 years, he's going to come back. And now they're finally figuring out, oh, that's what the parenthesis is about. God's not going to sit on his hands for 2,000 years. He's going to go do with the Gentiles, and then he's going to return to Israel. Now, in the early church, in the Middle Ages, the volcano continued to rumble and vent. The Roman Empire was in tumults. It eventually split. Then it fractured into 10, 12 pieces, and it fell apart. This looked apocalyptic. To them. The wicked kings and the governments were persecuting the church in the spirit of Antichrist. And it was the fractured Roman Empire. The Babylonian church was enforcing Babylonian Christianity. And the real believers were persecuted. And then we have the replacement theology, where men were looking to Eurocentric and Catholic Church-centric events rather than Israel-centric events. They just completely lost their bearings. It's no wonder we didn't have any understanding of prophecy. You add on top of that, wars and rumors of wars all across Europe for 1,500 years. You had the invasion of Islam that almost overthrew Europe. You had persecutions of the believers, and you had the Black Plague, and we could list the dozens of other things. We come into the rise of modern unbelief and New World Order stage setting. This is increased rumblings and ventings. The last days, we say, and specifically the last days started with the rebirth of Israel in 1948. But this modern Antichrist spirit really traces back to Enlightenment and rationalism in the 16 and 1700s. And with the rise of modern versions of the secret societies, and you add to this in the 1800s the rise of evolution, Marxism, and the Hegelian dialectic. You come into the late 1800s, we have the rise of Zionism with the goal of starting the Jewish state. And then following that, we have the rise of central banking, the rise of the modern stock exchanges, and the rise of the Federal Reserve. And the rise of the solid deep state here in America. We add to that the rise of public education with its roots in Marxism. Now we come to the final stage setting. This is the bulge on the mountains, folks. In World War II, we saw the worst anti-Semitism in history to this point. Then we saw Israel reborn on May 14, 1948. Currently, we're seeing Russia, Iran, and Turkey, three former enemies, come together in an evil triumvirate. This is the preparation for Gog and Magog. We see a sexual revolution. We see the rise of modern political correctness. We see critical race theory. We are in the final stages of the New World Order plan being rolled out with technocrats and technology. And we're seeing the world's governments intentionally introduce chaos. And they oftentimes play good cop, bad cop game against us, don't they? We get caught up in this, oh, we want to be with the good cops and we don't want the bad cops. No matter how we slice it or dice it, folks, even the good cops are still being used of the satanic powers behind the world. No matter what their motives are, they're still being used. And the New World Order agenda is still being rolled out. You can't stop it. You can't stop the freight train. So here, this is where we're at. The bulge is forming. And the perceived window of imminence is shrinking. For most of the church age, men were thinking things could accelerate to the second coming and the rapture of the church in their lifetime. We get back in the 70s and 80s, and many men were thinking, I think the rapture could happen the next decade or two. At present, a lot of the best minds are thinking, wow, this could happen the next few years. We're not saying it absolutely has to, but it looks like it could. This is eventually going to shrink down to the point where we're going to be saying, you know what? I think we only got a few months left. We're still not going to know the day nor the hour, but the window of imminence is shrinking. So notice the balance in this view of no signs. It honors the fact that no man knows the day nor the hour. It rejects a direct correlation between the rapture and the signs. It rejects date setting and high watch times. But it embraces the indirect correlation between the rapture and the signs of the tribulation. And it embraces prophetic convergence prior to the rapture. So folks, what we're seeing right now around us, imminence is on the accelerator. It is increasing. And every day, in my mind, from here on out, is a high watch day. Every day is a high watch day. Eyes wide open, brain engaged, heart on fire. We'll see you tomorrow.